Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Another video in store here where we're going to be looking at all things Pinotage. Again, because 2025 is the year for Pinotage, the 100th century that it has obtained in terms of it being created back in 1925. To today, 2025. So it's an exciting year. I'm going to put together a lot of videos where I'm interviewing key thinkers, key players, key shakers in all things Pinotage. And I am very delighted to invite Bruce Jack, who is on the other screen there. Bruce, having a drink. How's it going?
Yeah, I know. Well, I need to calm my nerves when I'm talking to someone as important as you, Jimmy.
A man of many words. I'll make sure that I send you a Christmas card this year. Thanks for that. So yeah, really great to have you on board, Bruce. I know your brand, Bruce Jack Wines, is doing exceptionally well globally, and you are making some really fascinating wines. And I've seen some real big waves being made in the UK too, with a lot of your wines at big key events. I'd like to get sort of beneath the surface on you to begin with, letting everybody out there know about you, how you fell into wine and how you came to create Bruce Jack Wines. And then a little bit about perhaps your range, where you get your wines from and all those things. And then we'll deep dive into Pinotage after that. Welcome on board.
Cool. Thanks, Jimmy. Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity and it's a big privilege. And I hope that I can be as riveting and as exciting as you.
I'm going to tell everybody out there, the reason I'm wearing a hat is that I did a research on Bruce, and he likes to wear a hat or two. And then on the green room before we started, he appears without a hat. So I'm still sporting mine for good measure. I think I'm going to bring you one when I'm coming over in a couple of weeks' time, Bruce.
Well, it's when you're full of Scottish genes like me, which is unfortunate on many levels, primarily because I like the bagpipes, but also because when you live in the African sun, the Jacks have been here since 1853 in South Africa. And I think we've learned very early on that you got to wear a hat. So it's more out of necessity with the bald nut than any other reason. But yeah, that it's hats are an interesting thing. For some reason, we had a photograph of me on the back label of the lifestyle range, which is the one that goes into the supermarkets.
Yeah,
and I mean, it was the photograph is probably 15 years old, so I look quite good. And it's a complete lie. And there's this there I'm wearing a bloody hat, so everyone expects me to be wearing a hat. But anyway, there we go. So I think for how did I fall into wine? I don't know if I've got an accurate answer. I don't think anyone does who hasn't been born on a wine farm. Because I think if you're born on a wine farm, it's an easy thing to do, primarily because your ancestors have spent all the money to establish it. So it's actually easier to try and start in the wine industry from scratch, which is what I've done. And I think, I'm encouraging my kids to, well, they're both actually involved and want to be involved. And I'm encouraging them to do it because I say to them, you've basically spent your entire inheritance creating this business. You might as well kind of take advantage of it somehow. So how did I get involved? Well, my mother was a musician. And my father was an architect, and I think both those professions require lots of wine. So my father, I think, encouraged me. I wanted to be an architect like him, obviously, as a lot of kids do. And he once was he took me aside after I'd been accepted at university to read for architecture, and he said to me, Bruce, I'm not sure you're going to be that good for architecture. I said, no, Dad. I mean, do you mean architecture is not going to be so good for me? He said, no, I think you need to do something else. But it would have been an easy road for me, actually. My father's a very well-known architect and city planner in South Africa. But I'm glad I didn't. When I was young, 16 years old, my grandmother, who obviously also a little bit of Scots going on there, she knew a good deal when she saw it. And at the local liquor store, the local liquor shop, this is the story I always tell, so you may have read it, Jimmy, but if you worked there, you became part of the staff, and you got a staff discount or staff price. And she had been talking to the manager, every couple of weeks. She went to get her single malt because she used to love a little nip of whiskey before bed. And she heard about this kind of good deal. So anyway, she wasn't going to let this go. So she said, well, my son needs a job packing shelves. So at 16, I started in the wine industry, in a liquor shop anyway. And I fell in love, but had a great wine selection. And I fell in love with the industry through the eyes of a consumer, and that is the part that isn't made up and isn't mythology. I think people make up myths because they get asked these questions and they have to try and justify why they've gone down this ridiculously hard path in life, which the wine industry is, unless you're born into it. So but the part that I know is true, which I know is not something I've made up, is that I fell in love with the industry because I saw the enthusiasm and passion on other people's faces. Yeah. And that was so I guess and what I know is that I still see the wine industry through the eyes of the consumer. And that's very unusual in my experience with other winemakers. I think wine marketeers and wine salespeople, you get that a lot, but very few winemakers look at the wine industry and look at their craft and look at their work through the eyes of the consumer. And and the higher and higher and more rarefied the wine, the less that happens. You often hear Burgundian winemakers saying they don't care if anyone drinks their wine because they're doing it for the earth or themselves or something. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think the reality is that everybody cares what the consumer thinks. I think it's the type of consumer that you want to listen to. Is the decision about who the type of consumer is that you care about listening to is actually the important point, and that takes a lot of soul searching. So if you are only interested in the person who's got £6.50 to spend, then that's a very different decision from a production perspective than if you trying to convince somebody to buy a bottle of Pinot Noir for £65 a bottle, particularly from South Africa. So it's kind of a little bit of a twist on it, but I think it goes back to that experience I had when I was young. I ended up, I played a lot of rugby and ended up eventually getting a degree in English. I actually got a Master's of Literature degree. And then all the time working in bottle stores. So I actually got that degree at St. Andrews University in Scotland, my master's. And then while I was there working in the local bottle store, obviously to make ends meet and get my, your weekly beer money. It was just, that was a wonderful experience because I'd been sort of working in the South African wine industry for many years in retail. And then having this global opportunity in terms of coming across all these different wines from around the world on a daily basis was fascinating and sort of just took me to the next level. It opened my eyes that little bit more. And I kind of knew then as I finished my master's that really I wasn't going to go into advertising or write a book or whatever other people do who've got English literature to go teach or something. I mean, I knew that I was going to be in the wine industry. And I landed up working for a company called South African Wine Imports, which was bringing in South African wine. The Mandela had been released. He had said it's okay to drink South African wine. The floodgates kind of opened. I think South Africa made a lot of mistakes in those early days in terms of what they did, and we can talk a little bit about that. I think people got greedy. People were inexperienced with the global market. And I think we're still suffering the hangover of some of those decisions made all that time ago. But we are fighting our way out of them. But we kind of nailed ourselves a little bit by being greedy and inexperienced, and also copying what other people did without being true to ourselves. Because I think psychologically what happened after apartheid was that a lot of white South Africans were kind of tarred and feathered with this negative, everyone must have been terrible kind of thing. And particularly farmers, and particularly the Afrikaans community, which was not true at all. But that was kind of how we were perceived in the world. And so we kind of lacked confidence in our own stories and in our own truth and in our own history, because we kind of downplayed that because we were embarrassed about it. And when you're talking about wine, you have to talk about that. So what happens is that there was a whole lot of stuff made up at the time to kind of trying to deflect the fact that the South African wine industry was predominantly white male and Afrikaans. And in fact, that was the wrong thing to do. We should have been a lot more honest about that. And we slowly coming back to that truth. And I think that has been a big difference in how South African winemakers talk about their craft and their work, because they're talking about it a lot more authentic and truer way. But in that process, and I was right at the beginning of South African wine coming into the UK. I lived in England at the time, and yeah, I think there's a wine that Matthew Clark sells called Cullinan View, which was one of my first brands, and that was listed in 1992. So what does that make? So that's most people were in kindergarten are going to listen to this, but
33 years ago.
Yeah, or maybe not even born when that was listed. So I've been around the block a long time. I came up with the brand, I did the blend, and we got it into Matthew Clark, and it still exists, which is quite cool. And there are a couple of other brands knocking about the UK from that era. And I was very fortunate because everything was opening up. People were interested in South Africa. So I was able to meet a lot of the top buyers, people like Steve Daniel, who was then putting together wine for Oddbins. He just sort of started, and he was the first person who then listed me after I'd become a winemaker, and who weirdly I'm still working for with this brand, because this is through Hallgarten, and the person who visioned this is actually Steve Daniel. So put that together. That's a 30 years journey. And also some really insightful, interesting buyers, particularly in the supermarkets at the time. Actually, there were a lot of MWs knocking about, whereas I think you see less and less of that these days in the supermarkets. So it was a very exciting time. But I realized actually I'm a really shit salesman. So I realized I needed to actually learn how to make the stuff. And I went and worked for a lady called Angela Muir, who was an MW, and she was working for a big company in Australia called BRL Hardy, then one of the biggest companies in the world, and certainly the biggest wine company in Australia. They were making wine, flying winemaker sort of wine all over the place, including in Bordeaux. And I went to work. My first vintage was in Bordeaux, and after that, I went and did a winemaking degree at the University of Adelaide, and it was the last year that we actually made wine on the famous Roseworthy campus just outside Adelaide. Yeah, sort of a storied and steeped in Australian winemaking myth. All the greats went through Roseworthy, and I was lucky enough, the first South African and also the last class to make wine actually in the old Roseworthy cellar. And I don't think there have been any other South Africans since me who've done a winemaking degree at the University of Adelaide. There have been a lot that have done wine marketing degrees. Mike Ratcliffe is one, and I know one of the Barlow boys did that. They own Rustenburg. So there has been a quite an important Australian influence from that perspective on the South African wine industry. And I was just, again, incredibly lucky to study there at the time when the Australian government were throwing money around and tax advantages to the wine industry. And the University of Adelaide was picking up the best researchers around the world, pouring money into top research. And you get this with, if you look at universities, and particularly those who teach organic chemistry around the world, you'll get these like surges of funding that come in. And if so you can look at the funding that was coming out of Dijon University on Pinot Noir clones, or out of Bordeaux on barrels, or out of and then there was a surge of funding that comes into the University of Adelaide in the mid 1990s, and a lot of, and if you Google, I don't know, succinic acid, which is an issue because it's the acid that's in the stems of grapes, and too many stems in your ferment, you get this. It almost smells like a reductive character. But you can't get rid of it with copper, and you can't get rid of it with aeration. It's there. It's stuck there. And that sort of research was being done in Australia at the time. So even now, you look at the issues that are things like using recycled wastewater for vineyard irrigation. Australia was dealing with climate change, in the mid 1990s, way before anyone else was thinking about those kind of things. Or like which seeds have tannin that are good for the structure of wine, and which seeds have tannin which are not. And I can tell you, Pinotage doesn't. But so I was just so fortunate to, everything sort of happened at the right time for me. And I think anyone who's had any success or any happiness in life and doesn't put it down, a lot of it down to luck, is lying. I was just very, very lucky. And then came home. I worked around the world. I worked in California and back in France and in Spain, Australia for 3 vintages. And then I came home and started a winery called Flagstone in 1998. That went on and was bought by Constellation in 2008. Constellation was then the world's biggest brand, biggest wine company, Fortune 500 company in America. And then that the South African bit got sold off, and it became Accolade. And I landed up back in Australia working for, guess who? Hardy's. So like this weird loop of like 25 years, so like a quarter of a century. My first job at BRL Hardy, and then kind of my last corporate job, which ended in 2018 when Accolade was sold. That was my exit. And it was just what I should have done, Jimmy, is retire. That was the sensible thing to do. My wife will tell you if you ever meet her. But I think once a winemaker, always a winemaker. Of course. I ended up running a group winemaker for Accolade, which was then the 4th largest wine business in the world, which was a lot of fun. Hugely educational, very humbling. The big Hardy's winery in Australia is in a little place called Berry, 4.5 hours drive north of Adelaide, northwest of Adelaide. And that's if you look at the tonnage that we did at Berry, we were doing somewhere between 60 and 65% of South Africa's entire tonnage in one winery. Wow. So it was a proper education. So those 25 years were this just incredible education, both in terms of knowledge and about the industry and winemaking, but also just in terms of learning about yourself, because of all the different experiences that I was able to have. So hugely fortunate. Yeah. So translate that now into Bruce Jack wines. Yeah. So huge mistake starting again at my age. I should have galloped off into the sunset. Although I'm very, very glad I didn't. I would have gone mad. It was, well, the ego played a role, of course, and whenever that does, it gets smashed out of you at some stage. But I sort of looked around me at the time when I was leaving this big corporate, just been sold for $1 billion. And I said, geez, if these oaks can do it, I'm sure I can just do a little bit like that on my own. Everything I've learned, it was almost like, why waste all all this experience? And so I went out and I got a bit of funding, and and started very differently though. I still believe this. I hadn't sort of an idea that it could be done differently, which is that there are the wine. One of the things that the wine industry gets caught up on and fails or is tripped up on is the fact that we've got very, very small margins. We can only make wine once a year. And so we tie up a lot of capital, which is fine. You can tie up a lot of capital if you've got big margins. If you're making iPhones and your margin is, I don't know what it is, 500% gross margin, you're fine. But when your gross margin is 30%, as you'll know from having your own winery, and you've got to tie up money for 3 years, I mean, a third of that gets taken in bank charges. So you end up living off, barely double digits net margins after marketing and all those kind of things. And it's very, very tough. And that is just one of the realities. When you go to one of these big wine shows like ProVine or Wine Paris, and I know, because I've been in the industry so long, that 70% of the people in those behind those stands are either losing money or just breaking even.
Yeah.
There's a rarefied few at the top who are in the luxury end. They might as well be selling Gucci handbags because it's all about selling luxury. And then there are the guys at the bottom who are selling the volume. And we spoke about people like Advini and Contratora and Torres, and they're these like incredibly well-run machines that have been doing it for a long time, and really know what they're doing. And they're making money. And then there's all these passion-driven projects in the middle that are struggling, and it's sad. And one of the things I thought of, well, if we could just collaborate a little bit more, because I know I'm going to be one of those guys in the middle pretty soon. So how do I do this in a way that doesn't put the family in debt for the next 4 generations? And and it's through collaboration. So you need to know where your weaknesses are. You need to identify what you need to succeed, and then the things that you are confident you can do better than anyone else, you do those. And the ones that you can't, you've got to collaborate. You've got to share the spoils with people who can bring those things to the party.
Yeah.
So it's a collaborative model where what we try and do is actually it's very open book. So all the business I do, it takes some getting used to, particularly for customers, particularly for agents, and in some cases supermarkets, where you say, look, I'm going to show you exactly what it's cost me to make. I can guarantee this is the best possible cost because I've been doing it for so long. I'm going to show you what it cost me to make. I'm going to show you what I want to make. And then I'm going to show you what you can make. Yeah. When you're talking to a big supermarket and you start talking in those terms, their hackles rise because they're the big dog in the room. They don't want to be spoken to like that, and also they are terrified of trying to share real data, because in big companies, no one really knows what's going on. It's all smoke and
yeah.
So but when you can get people over that fear and you can show them that there is a collaborative approach that allows you to work together to get the best possible value for money wine into the right channel the most efficiently, suddenly, even though you're a small player, you have the same kind of power that those big established brands have. And so it was a strategy that has been very successful in certain markets and less successful in others because of, I think, the maturity of the business. So the maturity of the actual wine business. I mean, the UK is a classic example. It is so advanced compared to the rest of the world in terms of how the business operates. And it's almost like there's no fat left because Britain has been buying wine for so long from so many people that it's despite what duties are thrown at it, it can absorb those and move and not panic the way that other countries can. I think definitely there are challenges in the UK, but it's a country in which you can collaborate because people are not second guessing. Everyone knows there's so much information out there in terms of the longevity of the business. I mean, the go back to the Methuian Treaty of whenever it was, 1483.
Yeah.
1483. Yeah. The British attitude towards wines have changed the trajectory of countries.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just incredible. So you're doing, you're trying to sell wine into this incredibly sophisticated and mature marketplace, and in those marketplaces, there's the opportunity to do this kind of collaborative model. Less so in other countries, which are sort of coming to wine, and often from a different perspective. Often from wine is not necessarily a part of daily life, or a healthy addition to a meal. It's often a status symbol, or it'll eventually mature. But we've been making wine for probably 15,000 years. And we've been drinking alcohol for probably 100,000 years as a species. So this is something that people often say the oldest trade is prostitution, but I think it must have been wine, because that led to prostitution. That's why. It's just such a beautiful industry, and so all encompassing.
So what's the model in terms of the ground? Are you buying in fruit? Is it estate owned, and what kind of fruit are you buying?
So we make wine in a couple of different countries: Chile, the US, Spain, and South Africa. South Africa is by far the largest production hub, and in South Africa we've got it's actually interesting. It's sort of a Contratura model. So I don't know if Contratura still do this, but when we were looking at the competitors for Hardy's, and we were trying to work out why, when we did blind tastings at similar price points with our produce from everywhere. I mean, we were also making wine in Chile at the time, which fell under my jurisdiction. Why Contratura was just so much better than us at the price points. And it was so frustrating. You would do a wine, you could always spot the yellowtail. You could always, spot those guys. And then you came across the Contratura, and these wines were, balanced. They had character. They had great color. You could tell there was longevity. They were made, they were made perfectly. There were no edges. It was like, oh my word, how do these guys get it right every single time? So we started trying to research them, and we went there and we met with them, and we eventually worked out that there was a really interesting sourcing model, which was that, and I'm not sure if it's changed, as I say, but broadly speaking, 30% of the grapes are their own vineyards. 30% of the grapes are bought in, and 30% of their volume is bought in wine. And what that allows you to do is that you can obviously always control your own grapes, but you've got, in terms of quality and whatever, but you really do also need to be able to buy in grapes from other people, because as climate changes, or we all experiencing climate breakdown, where your vineyards might be is a sort of a multi-generational decision, and there might be other places where suddenly you're getting Pinot ripened at a slightly different time, and you're getting better fruit, and so that gives you flexibility, and it gives you a buffer against the unmovability of vineyard investments. And you also don't want to overdo the vineyard investment story because of those things. It's very risky. It's very illiquid. And then so you buy in grapes, and what you do is you develop partnerships. So you develop partnerships with people in other areas, or that have different philosophies, or all that kind of stuff, because particularly when you're in a corporate, you need some of that balancing and some of the challenges from alternative sources of viticulture to keep your guys sharp and honest. That's also part of the thing. And then 30% is bought in on the open market, which is the right sort of, 33 and a third, you know what I mean? A third is bought in on the bulk market, because that allows you to play the marketplace. So in some years, you're going to have to pay a little bit more for your Sauvignon Blanc. But in other years, if something happens in the US market and those traditional bulk sellers, or something happens in China, suddenly there's a wash of Sauvignon that not only do you get the advantage of getting at a lower price than you can produce, but also you can see that it's going to have a knock-on effect around the world because you are in the bulk game. So what the bulk game gives you is an ability to almost fly with radar. Whereas if you're not in the bulk game and you're not watching the little tweaks in price, and when the panic sets in and people suddenly drop 20, 30%, you're not up to date with that. So you can't then extrapolate that panic into the marketplace and price yourself accordingly. So it gives you all these advantages, and that's how we started running our business. And that's the same philosophy that I've taken on in my business now. So we grow more or less 30%, or it's not quite that much, but we have 30% of the grapes either that we grow or that we have under management. In other words, we take all the decisions, and then there's 30% of grapes that are bought in, as it were, and those are made at various cellars. So that's the other complication. We're talking viticulture now. So when you get to the production, this winemaking production side of it, we've got collaborations and joint ventures with various production partners. So there are three main big cellars, which are probably 3 of the top 10 big cellars in South Africa. It used to be old cooperatives that we have very important relationships with, and we take a certain percentage of their production capacity every year, and those are long-term relationships, many of which go back 20 years or longer. And then we also own our own wineries. So I'm actually in the one winery now. This is where I live, on a farm called Appelsdrift, which is in the Overberg Highlands. And you met my assistant winemaker earlier, Jimmy. Yeah. And then we also own 25% of a winery called Black Oyster Catcher, which is at the very southern tip of Africa, at just over the mountain here. It's about 40 kilometers away. It's in an area called Elim, E-L-I-M, and that's a very, very cool climate, very unusual wine growing area. So very, very good for aromatic white varieties like Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, Riesling, etc. So we've kind of spread, and we've got obviously quite a large winemaking team as a result. And then we've got other smaller cellars that we utilize. So we also work very closely with a guy called Ati Lowe from Opstal, which is in the Slanghoek Valley. And we do a lot of our experimental stuff through him, because he's close to one of the big viticultural bulk growing areas, but he's very much like us in terms of his pushing the edge of winemaking, a lot of white skin ferments, a lot of whole bunch red ferments, a whole lot of, on the edge sort of winemaking. So really looking for interest, looking for body, looking for mouthfeel. And we use those little bits and pieces that we make here or there, which we blend into all our wines, from the stuff that goes to the supermarket right up to the stuff that sells for £100 a bottle in Hedonism on Berkeley Square, for example.
Yeah. Bruce, could you talk to us a bit about your Pinotage then? I've got the off the charts Pinotage here. Is this the only one you produce? I think the best way to talk about your Pinotage, I've interviewed people already about Pinotage, but you've got a real great sort of economical stance on it. Your economics behind Pinotage. How does Pinotage fit in South Africa's model in terms of economics? What are the advantages and disadvantages around the grape variety?
I think it's essential to South Africa's economic sustenance from a wine industry perspective. I think it's central to South Africa's sense of self from a psyche perspective, just as much as the barbecue is, or we call it a braai.
Right.
So that whole culinary thing is important to us. It is our grape, and it's almost, and we're incredibly proud of it. How central, how difficult is it, and what are the pros and cons? Well, I think it's different when you look at the vineyard. It's different when you look at winemaking, and it's different when you look at sales. So the business side of it. They've all got their pros and cons, right? And they're all different. So if we focus on viticulture, it's not a huge surprise to me that it took me so long to learn how to make a drinkable Pinotage. I'd studied in Australia. Shiraz was flowing through my veins, as every Aussie winemaker will tell you, and you know, and the odd Grenache and that sort of thing. So when I came home and started Flagstone, weirdly, the one variety I couldn't get my hands on was Shiraz. In 1998, I think 3% of the Shiraz plantings were older than 5 years old in South Africa. Wow. I mean, there was nothing available. Yeah. People were planting it like mad, and there's an argument now that we've probably got enough. But well, I disagree with that. And because that's all about climate and area, right? So it gets complicated. But with Pinotage, that's what was available. There was lots of it, and it was, I could afford it, you know. And so I bought in Pinotage. Oh my word! It was horrifying. I never even tasted such bad wine. Never mind, you know, put my name to it. I poured such a lot down the drain. And it really knocked me. I had a huge, you know, it knocked me because I suddenly started losing confidence in my ability to make wine because I couldn't master this variety. And part of the problem was that I was buying whatever was available, and I had no control over the vineyard. And so the next year I started getting into the vineyard, and I started talking to people who knew what they were doing. And I'd stopped treating it like Shiraz, and I started treating it like something completely different, almost like Pinot Noir. I knew a bit about Pinot Noir. I'd worked with Pinot Noir, particularly in Sonoma. So I said, okay, well, how did we make Pinot in Sonoma? Let's start adapting some of those things in the vineyard. And eventually, so my first vintage was 99, and I think my first drinkable vintage was 2004. So it took me 5 goes, really, I suppose, or 4 goes to get something right. And that was really because it took that long to get the vineyards right. And then, of course, when I started getting my head around Pinotage, it was amazing how much easier everything else was to make. So Pinotage, because of the diversification of soil, you've got, particularly with red grape varieties, if your vineyard is slightly out of balance and it's producing more fruit than it should, you get incredible unevenness of ripening because the soil's different, right? So in a like a rugby field or a football field space, you've probably got 8 different soil types. In the Riverland, it's the same soil for as far as you can fly a plane. It's a completely different, you know, set of challenges. And so when you've got a variety that is very sensitive to unripeness, then you cannot pick unripe Pinotage. It's as bad as picking unripe Pinot Noir. There's a tiny little window with Pinot Noir where it's just green and horrible, and then it's just beautiful strawberry. And you'll know if you make Pinot that it differs by soil type and year and clone and all that, but there's this tiny little window to get right. Now, if you've got a vineyard with Pinot ripening at all different times, and it's all dark, and you can't tell from looking at it what's ripe and what isn't, you can't taste every bunch, you're kind of stuffed. So you've got to do 2 things. First of all, you've got to try and plant Pinotage because it's mama's Pinot Noir, so it's going to inherit some of that. You've got to try and plant that on as homogeneous soil as possible. Even if your vineyard looks weird and it's kind of like the shape of a piano rather than a square, you just cut out the corner that isn't going to give you the right kind of, or the homogeneity. So small Pinotage vineyards are often better. That's the first one, because they've done the proper soil profile holes and bang, bang, bang. The second thing is as you hit veraison, when you've got 75% of your bunches or 60% of your bunches, depending on how much of a nerd you are, have colored up. You go and you just cut the rest off. Get rid of all the green bunches.
This is Pinotage is one of its parents, Pinot Noir. Of course, it's super important. This is what we do in our vineyard sites here. This will be happening in the next. I mean, we're having early veraison here, so we're currently in August, middle of August, and we'll be having this task will be in the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks. And we just go around and cut off everything that's just lagging behind. As soon as most of the bulk fruit is going through to the slightly darker color, anything that's slightly translucent just goes. We just get rid of it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the dark side. It's going to the dark side. Yeah, get rid of all the Luke Skywalkers.
Easy.
So so that's essential with Pinotage, and sometimes you got to do it more than once. And then the thing is, for God's sake, pick it ripe. And if you can get those, so it sounds very easy to say, but I mean, choosing a vineyard site is probably the most important thing for Pinotage, and it's the thing most of us get wrong. Altitude plays a huge role, like it does for other difficult varieties like Cabernet Franc in South Africa. Altitude is almost essential to get it right. Soil type, obviously, same reason why it's important for all other varieties, but this getting it as homogeneous as possible, and then making sure that anything that's lagging gets dropped. And if you can do that, then you've got the building blocks and potential to make something really great. And obviously that takes a lot of time, and you might start working on a vineyard and you put in 5 years of your life on this vineyard, but actually to begin with it wasn't the right vineyard, which is what happened to me. So which is why you've got to try and get your children involved so that they can take advantage of some of these things, because it's only the next generation that really benefits from all this self-inflicted pain. And then I think in the winery,
can I just pose a question whilst I have it, Bruce? One of the big initial critiques of Pinotage, certainly at the turn of the millennium in the UK, was a lot of them smelling of that kind of isomal acetate character, right? Be it sort of burnt rubbery, whatever it may be, that kind of spray paint, creosote, blah, blah, blah. Is this something that is, in your opinion, a problem that happened in viticulture with Pinotage, and then winemaking was not, it therefore just happened in winemaking because the problem started in the vineyard, or is it a bit of both? And has that problem sort of dissipated today because of knowledge of both those? It's
80% vineyard management problem, 20% winemaking, because the winemaking can actually exacerbate it. The winemaking can't make it better. So it's mostly the vineyard, and it's unripe fruit. It's as simple as that. It's just unripe Pinotage. But Pinotage has a very different organic chemical structure from anything else. That's why people who taste, if you have to taste 100 Pinotages in a competition, you end up getting palate fatigue very quickly, because the actual way that the protein chain is constructed is very different from any other variety that we've ever come across. So it feels different on your palate. And if you're super sensitive to things like epicatechin or catechin or bitterness, epicatechin and catechin are a species of tannin, very small molecular weight. Pinotage has a lot of that in it. So,
and that's all from its seeds, I take it. All from its. A
lot of it is, the catechins are all from seeds. So how you make a wine, if it's already a sort of dual ripeness or multiple ripeness levels, you've already got the problem in there. You don't need a lot of it to spoil the whole batch. Then and then you exacerbate it by having a useless crusher, or including too many green stems, or punching down too hard, or pumping over too hard, or whatever. You've just fucked the wine up. And it happens so often. It used to happen often. What's happened now is that the vineyards are in a lot better state. I think people have realized it's been an interesting sort of 20 years to watch how viticulture has changed around Pinotage. There's been a lot of research done. That's the other thing that happened. It was so core to our sense of self that it got a lot of focus, got a lot of university focus in terms of research and understanding what were the components that were actually making up the bitterness and the rusty nails and the burnt tie and whatever, and pinpointing those aroma compounds. Because just remember, Pinotage does two things. It can have really weird aromatics, and then it gets exacerbated by this bitterness. And together they give you this rusty nail character. And they kind of the oneness really comes from the vineyard, and the other, as from all the research, comes from winemaking. But if you start with the vineyard, the decent vineyard in the beginning, it's very easy to kind of keep that quality in a winery. It's impossible for a winery to improve a bad grape, as you know. But if you've got a good grape to begin with, then it's if you get the winery right, and a lot of it is about how you treat the fruit. When is oxygen applicable? When should it be pumped over? When shouldn't it be pumped over? And alcohol plays a big role. So alcohol is a stripping agent. So you don't want to be abusing varieties like Pinotage towards the end of ferment. In other words, pumping over a lot or punching down a lot. You want to get that out of the way in the juice stage where there's very little alcohol, because then there isn't the stripping agent which breaks down your tannins into epicatechins, or breaks up your color compounds, all that kind of stuff, which happens later. So also, when oxygen is involved, how often, and temperature plays quite a big role in varieties like this. It's really, really difficult to screw up Cabernet or Shiraz. They are bulletproof varieties. It's almost impossible. But difficult varieties like Pinotage, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Franc, Monastrell, Carignan, these are tricky varieties which are challenging in both the vineyard and the winery, but that's why they are so beautiful. Because when they are great, like when you come across, be honest, when you've been to Burgundy and you've tasted at 20 wineries, you've tasted 40 wines, there will be 10 that are good. There will be 5 that you would gift people and write about. But there will be 1 that'll change your life. Because that's what Pinot Noir can do. Now, I don't think Cabernet can do that very easily. I really don't. But you'll taste 40 cabs going around the left bank, and 38 of them will be great. You'll drink them. So, but to get that life-changing experience, you need difficult varieties, because they have something else. It takes so much more intent to do them better. It takes so much more respect. It takes so much more of your life, because you've got to put it in from the beginning of where you decide to plant the vineyard to handing on the secrets to the next generation. That's where the magic happens. Now, that is proper dedication. That makes you feel really insignificant. And if you can get that right when it clicks with the next generation or the one after, oh my word, you've got something that changes your life. Because it's so beautiful, it's so multi-layered, and there's so much energy there, energy of place, energy of intent, all that kind of stuff that is all mixed in and goes into your body and determines whether or not you have a good dream or not. I mean, this is what we're talking about. It's so I think Pinotage is benefits from being difficult, because when it's good, it's sublime. But then it has this challenge, and I think the fact that it has that challenge is what makes it exciting, and what makes it special. And then the selling of it, how important is it to not only the psyche of being South African, but also what it means. It's fascinating to see how some winemakers turn their back on Pinotage in a way with a ferociousness and a passion that doesn't make sense. And I think partly it's because there was a political thing. There was we don't belong to the past, and we want to, we don't belong to that old era, old South African apartheid era. That was part of it. And then I think there was another part of it to say this variety is just too difficult, and let's focus on international varieties. But it was and I'm also surprised and intrigued by the ferocity with which people crit Pinotage, because people attack the grape. And this to me is bizarre. So if you come across a bag Pinot Noir, which is a daily occurrence in my life, you don't attack the grape, because you know it can produce good wines. You make excuses for the wine. So you say, okay, this is a crap Pinot Noir. Well, the grower's wife had an affair with the neighbor this year, and that's why he wasn't focused, and he was depressed, and that's why, okay, the wine's okay, fine, and we'll give it a chance. We'll taste it again next year. You come across a bag Pinotage, and you don't say, oh, well, maybe the grower's wife had an affair with the neighbor. No, you say it's a shit grape. Now, that doesn't make sense, because it's not the grape's fault. It's the fact that his wife had an affair with the neighbor's fault, or it's the weather's fault, or it's, whatever, because you can't ever blame a grape. It doesn't make sense to me.
I think it's entrenched in history, though, as well. If your comparison of those two there, if you think about the French with Pinot Noir, and you've got the wonderful class social battle between Pinot Noir and Gamay, for instance, with the first Duke of Burgundy outlawing Gamay, and a number of that. And that was in the 14th century. And then for 700 years after that, it's imprinted in the French psyche that Gamay is a peasantry grape for the lesser people, and Pinot Noir is this high quality grape always. So if you get a crap Pinot Noir, you're exactly right. You're going to make excuses because it's the aristocratical, noble grape variety. And Pinotage is similar in that vein of, it seems like it has a short history, so therefore it's not embedded in anybody's history. It's carving out its own history, but it hasn't had enough time. So
I like it. I love that. Yeah, that's a very, very good insight. I 100% agree with you, Jimmy. And I think, the newness of it is also, it also puts people a little bit off. And then, of course, the sales side has its pros and cons, because as soon as you offer a Pinotage, you are having to work a little bit harder on sales, because it's generally easier to sell another variety. But when you get it right, then it actually it's a good business decision, because you've worked that extra bit harder to get through the door. And because the consumer, it's really interesting. We place so much of what goes wrong or what doesn't work on the product, when actually a lot of it is all about route to market and just being available. And if you put a decent Pinotage on a supermarket shelf, people will take it off that shelf more than once, because most of the consumers out there have kind of heard of it, but haven't had all the bad rap. So they will try it. And as long as you don't mess it up, as long as you provide them with a really great quality red wine, they will be back and buy it again. But you've got to be on the shelf first, right? So it's getting through the gatekeeper with the Pinotage is often so challenging.
Well, that's what bribes are for. So can I just ask you, because we haven't got much time left, Bruce, on
I think we're 25 minutes over, aren't we?
Yeah. I tasted your wine, and I loved it for its absolute drinkability, which of course is probably going to be one of your core principles, core pillars for it. It really should be. But what I really liked about it, of course, it doesn't have any of those rustic edges. So there's none of that, but it's bright and very fresh. So is this something which Pinotage is, do you do any whole berries in this? Or is it a case of just doing less extraction or whatever it may be? Because I find that it had that kind of whole berried element to it. Then, is this something that Pinotage people are adopting more now with Pinotage? Are they starting to focus more on whole berry, less whole cluster, but maybe whole berry?
Yeah. Well, you finished it off with a very insightful comment. Whole cluster doesn't work very well with Pinotage at this level, because you're not going to get the perfect ripeness. You don't have the money to spend in the vineyard that you do at this. I've got this one as well, which is the one that it's the Flag of Truce, which is the top of our range. So this is I think this is 80 quid in hedonism. I can't remember. Maybe it's 60. I can't remember. I'm not good on pricing. But whereas this goes through Hallgarten, and I think it's 14 quid or something. So I think that's the retail price, and that's only sold through independents, and it is made with a lot of whole berry. So, but not whole cluster. This has whole cluster, but this is perfectly ripe, and this is a tiny. This is 3 barrels.
Yeah.
So this is the off the charts is a substantially more volume. It's about 6,500 cases of 4.5. So to get the off the charts right, and to get that brightness and that drinkability out of it, you're looking at about 60% whole berry.
Yeah.
Also, there are no pump overs done post 50% ferment. Nothing.
Okay.
Just it's
just the initial pump overs to keep the cap going, and then you just retract. You just do nothing at that point. Yeah.
Nothing. It finishes, and we actually press it before it's dry. That's the other thing. So that gets pressed at about 75-80% through ferment. And then there's always a little bit of sugar in the grapes that you press. So your sugar goes up a bit, and you're probably on about 60% potential alcohol. And then the last 40, as long as you get your yeast and your temperatures right, the rest goes through in tank. Generally, there isn't a problem with that. Often the challenge is you get a stuck ferment when you press, before end of ferment, and you suddenly get this rush of sugar, and your yeast aren't up for the job, and then you get a stuck ferment. So we've kind of learned how to do that over the years, how to get it right. And so you don't get so you're pressing the skins before alcohol has done its job of stripping out all the small bitter tannin. That's a very important point. You also getting that bright red fruit character through the partial carbonic maceration of the whole berries. Yeah. So that's why it's very red fruited and not purple fruited. But at the same time, it's got, so without the bitterness associated with the tannin, it's got wonderful mouthfeel, and that sort of translates into this beautiful kind of bright red cherry aftertaste, which is, and then it's bone dry as well. So that's also important with Pinotage. You can hide a lot of faults with sugar in winemaking. Sugar and Pinotage just don't work. You can.
It's such an old school methodology, isn't it? It stems from the Italians with all those really rustic Piemontese grapes, where they would either leave sugar or bubbles or both in the product. This is a long time ago, centuries ago, but it was a way of covering up all of that sort of grippy, horrendous catechin, because there's a bunch in Nebbiolo and Grignolino and all those varieties, but they were just a way of kind of just smoothing out those edges.
Yeah, I know. Try eat a McDonald's burger bun. It's also full of sugar, because otherwise the only reason you put it down your throat. Yeah. So and sugar's not good for you. So we don't like sugar, and we work very hard, particularly with varieties it's not the only difficult variety that we work with. Carmenere is another one in Chile, where we've gone through a similar learning experience around, because it's such a different kind of structure. But again, that's a wonderful. I should have used that example earlier with when you get Carmenere right. Oh my God, it blows the top of your head off. It's so beautiful.
And when you get it wrong, it's fucking awful.
Yeah. It's like Pinotage. So and I guess as a winemaker, you want to. Nebbiolo is a classic. You want to, because when those varieties sing, they like fill the entire cathedral, and it's and that's really those high points of your life as a winemaker or as a wine lover even are marked by those experiences when something is just, oh my God, there's something in this glass which is just so beautiful, and it just grabs, not just your animal attention. It grabs your
cerebral.
brain. Yeah, it's cerebral, and it's like, okay, shake me out. and Pinotage has the ability to do that. So I absolutely love it as a result of those things, and I think it is important to South Africa from a sort of a national psyche perspective.
Hugely.
We don't have a lot, to hold on to. There's not a lot that gives us hope. And rugby and good Pinotage and Bry's kind of,
and probably the one-day series of cricket coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that terrifies most of us. I was bottling my first Method Cup Classic sparkling wine when we got run out against Australia. I was halfway through the tank, so to go back to bottle for the re-fermentation. And I couldn't get anyone to work. We were so depressed. So we just let the rest of the tank go off because we were so depressed. So,
listen, Bruce, I have to wrap this up, my friend. I've got to go and get my kids from school, from summer camp. The one thing I want to finish on is that I've had a lot of samples sent to me over the past sort of month or so. Around Pinotage, and I've had, a lot of brilliant diversity, and I think that's one thing that Pinotage is ticking these days. It's not a one-trick pony. There's a lot of great wines, some that are more kind of savory, maybe coming from more of that coffee clip soil. Your style that I've tried, which is the off the charts, being that brighter style. There's grippy, tannic, age-worthy styles. There's red fruit, black fruit. You name it. What I want to say about yours is that I got two bottles. Two bottles were sent by Hallgarten. 3 bottles rather. And I did one for all this series, and I opened up another one just because I love drinking it. It was not something that my palate, it caused me palate fatigue or, screw cap, open, nice glass, which just was very, very drinkable. So I've got one bottle left that I'm going to use on a walk around tasting at my school. But yeah, I just wanted to share that little bit. I just think it's a really great wine that was keenly priced, drinkable style. And I was wondering when at the start when you said that your mother was a musician, your father was an architect. Is the off the charts an amalgamation of that? Because if you think off the record is the musical side, and then on the charts is a term that architects would use. So I was wondering if it was an amalgamation. But I don't know. I'm
going to steal that from you from now, and that's going to be the reason for my name. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. Thanks so much, Jimmy. I've loved this. I know I've done a lot of talking. I apologize. I'm sure you had really good questions that I didn't let you ask.
No, that's absolutely fine. That's what I have an editor for, so it's all cool. I'm kidding.
No, I'm very happy with that. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
My pleasure, and I hope to see you in the next few weeks. Let me know any details you have. Oh, I should probably wrap this up for everybody else because they don't want to hear the last bits. But thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Bruce, thank you so much for the conversation. I really enjoyed you talking about the model that you have with Pinotage. Well, your model you have with your estate, and then really sort of lovely, frank conversation around Pinotage and the vineyard winemaking and how it's evolved from understanding the grape varieties. And that's why I think it's so exciting today. You're more likely to get a quality Pinotage, and you really do get quality Pinotage. So thank you so much for that. I'll put all the information about Bruce Jack Wines, social media handles in the description of the video. But Bruce, final thoughts, anything to say? Thank you very much from me.
Final thoughts would be, I guess I have what I missed out on saying was that the Pinotage Renaissance or revival from its nadir in the beginning of the 1990s was driven by a lot of people in the industry who took Pinotage seriously and stood up for the variety and believed in it when no one else did. It is an underdog variety. I love underdogs in all shapes and forms, and Pinotage is that. But with the focus that it got, and there were a lot of winemakers who went before me who did this and who believed in the variety. I think that's important to my metaphorical hat to those guys and women who went before, particularly in the research department at the University of Stellenbosch, and to believe in the South Africanness of it. And we are we have a lot of challenges in Africa and in South Africa. So having something like this that is ours, in which no one's interested in the sob story, people are interested in how you overcame the challenge.
Yeah,
and that you have overcome the challenge. And I think we've overcome the challenge of difficult Pinotage, and I think the wines can sing, and they're beautiful, and that's so exciting. That's the story.
Yeah, fantastic. Very well put. Thank you. That tells the evolution, I think, of Pinotage just down to the detail. So Bruce, thank you so much. And thanks, let's see each other soon. Cheers, everybody. Goodbye.